I was out for a jog in the park, trying to clear my head after a long day of work. As I ran past the playground, I heard someone muttering incoherently. At first, I thought it was just a homeless person talking to themselves, but as I got closer, I realized it was a mumble rapper. He was sitting on a bench, his head bobbing up and down as he muttered adlibs under his breath. Yeah, 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 he repeated over and over again, punctuated by occasional skrt and uh-huh. I thought it was odd, but I didn't pay him much attention and kept jogging. As I circled back around, I noticed that the rapper was now standing and seemed to be staring at me. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. I felt a shiver run down my spine as he started muttering faster and faster, his adlibs becoming more frantic. I quickened my pace, but he started following me. I could hear his footsteps behind me, and his muttering had turned into an eerie chant. Yeah, 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 skrt, uh-huh, he repeated over and over again, his voice getting louder and more disturbing. I started to panic and didn't know what to do. I turned around and tried to confront him, but he just kept muttering and following me. It was like he was in some sort of trance. I finally managed to outrun him and made it back to my apartment safely. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about that rapper. I did some research and found out that he had a history of drug abuse and erratic behavior. It's chilling to think what could have happened if I hadn't been able to get away from him. To this day, I still get goosebumps whenever I hear someone muttering those same repetitive adlibs. It's a reminder that danger can be lurking around any corner, even in the most unexpected of places. I was walking home from a party, the bass from the music still ringing in my ears. I was feeling good, a little buzzed from the drinks, and looking forward to getting home and crashing in my bed. As I walked, I saw a figure walking towards me. It was a man, tall and skinny, wearing a hoodie and baggy pants. He had a backpack slung over his shoulder and was walking with a strange gait, almost like he was dancing. As he got closer, I could hear him muttering under his breath. It sounded like he was rapping, but the words were incomprehensible. He was mumbling and slurring his words, and it was hard to tell what he was saying. I tried to walk past him, but he stepped in front of me, blocking my path. Yo, what's up? He said, looking me up and down. Nothing, just trying to get home, I said, trying to walk around him. Nah, let me rap for you, he said, stepping in front of me again. I hesitated for a moment, not sure what to do. He looked harmless enough, but something about him made me uneasy. He began to rap, and I realized that he was a mumble rapper. His words were still slurred and difficult to understand, but there was a strange energy to his rapping. It was almost like he was possessed, lost in his own world. As he rapped, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. His words seemed to take on a life of their own, and I felt like he was rapping directly to me. It was as if he was trying to tell me something important that I needed to hear. When he finished rapping, he looked at me with a strange intensity. Remember what I said, he whispered before walking away. I walked home, still feeling uneasy. It wasn't until the next day that I realized the significance of his words. He had rapped about a house party that was going to end in tragedy. I called the police, and they were able to stop the party before anyone was hurt. To this day, I don't know who that mumble rapper was, or how he knew about the party. But I'm grateful that he crossed my path that night, and that I listened to what he had to say. I was on my way home from a late-night shift at the fast food restaurant where I worked. It was a warm summer night, and I decided to walk home instead of taking the bus. As I walked down the quiet street, I noticed a man walking towards me. He was wearing a hoodie and baggy pants, with his hood pulled up over his head. As he got closer, I could hear him mumbling to himself. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but it sounded like he was rapping. As we passed each other, he turned and looked at me. I could see the whites of his eyes shining in the darkness. He stopped and turned around, following me with his eyes as I walked away. I quickened my pace, feeling uneasy. I could hear him mumbling behind me, getting louder and more aggressive. I turned around, and he was still there, rapping to himself incoherently. I broke into a run, but he kept pace with me, still rapping and mumbling. I could feel his hot breath on my neck, and I knew I had to do something to get away from him. I turned a corner and ran into a nearby convenience store, gasping for air. The man followed me in, still rapping and mumbling. He approached me, and I could see the wild look in his eyes. I grabbed a bottle of water and threw it at him, hoping to stun him long enough for me to make my escape. To my surprise, it worked. He stumbled back, cursing and mumbling. I bolted out of the store and ran all the way home, my heart pounding in my chest. I never saw the mumble rapper again, but I knew I had come dangerously close to being his victim. From that night on, I never walked home alone again. And whenever I heard someone rapping to themselves, I made sure to stay as far away as possible. I was walking home from work when I heard the sound of music blasting from a nearby alleyway. Curious, I peeked inside to see a young man rapping to himself, his eyes closed in concentration. At first, I thought he was just another aspiring rapper, trying to make a name for himself in the music industry. But then I heard the lyrics, and they were unlike anything I had ever heard before. His rhymes were filled with violent imagery and profanity, and he kept repeating the same phrases over and over again. "Got a Glock in my hand, gonna kill all my haters," he rapped, his voice growing louder and more aggressive with each verse. I started to feel uneasy, and I tried to slip away unnoticed. But the rapper had seen me and was now blocking my path. "Hey, you there," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You gonna listen to my mixtape or what?" I tried to walk past him, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me back. "Come on, man, don't be like that," he said, pressing a CD into my hand. "My SoundCloud profile is blowing up, and you're missing out." I knew I had to get away from him, so I politely declined and hurried off down the alleyway. But I could still hear his voice behind me, muttering to himself and rapping under his breath. For the next few weeks, I avoided that alleyway at all costs. But one day, I had to walk past it again on my way home from work. To my horror, I saw the rapper standing there again, his eyes fixed on me. "Hey, it's you again," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Why don't you like my music? Is it because you're scared of me?" I tried to keep walking, but he followed me down the street, rapping all the while. I could feel his eyes on me, and I knew I was in danger. Finally, I made it to my apartment building and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. But even from the safety of my own home, I could still hear the sound of the rapper's voice, echoing in my ears like a nightmare that would never end. I was walking home from a friend's party, trying to shake off the alcohol-induced haze that was clouding my mind. It was late, and the streets were empty, except for a figure walking towards me in the distance. As we got closer, I could hear him muttering under his breath. As he passed by me, I caught a glimpse of his face. It was a mumble rapper, famous for his repetitive adlibs and catchy beats. I couldn't believe my luck, and I tried to engage him in conversation. He didn't say much, just muttered some adlibs like "yeah" and "okay." I walked alongside him, trying to get him to open up. But he seemed distant, lost in his own world. We walked for a few blocks, until we reached a dark alley. The rapper stopped in his tracks and turned to me. His eyes were glazed over, and his adlibs had turned into a sinister whisper. Yeah, okay, he muttered, his voice barely audible. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I knew I had to get out of there. But before I could move, the rapper lunged at me with a knife. I dodged his attack and ran as fast as I could. I could hear his adlibs echoing in the distance as I sprinted away from him. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. I never saw the Mumble rapper again, but his adlibs still haunt me to this day. Every time I hear them on the radio, I'm reminded of that terrifying night in the alley. It's a reminder that danger can lurk around any corner, even in the form of a famous rapper. I was working the night shift at a gas station on the outskirts of town. It was a quiet night, and I had nothing to do but listen to the radio and watch the occasional car pass by. But that all changed when a black SUV pulled up to the gas pump. The driver was a young man, with tattoos covering his arms and a gold grill on his teeth. He was wearing a hoodie with the hood up, and he had a large entourage with him. As he got out of the car, I could hear him muttering adlibs under his breath. Mumble, mumble, yeah, I, mumble, mumble, huh. I recognized him immediately as a local Mumble rapper, known for his repetitive adlibs and controversial lyrics. He walked into the store and started browsing the snack aisle, still muttering under his breath. As I rang up his purchases, he started to get agitated. He was muttering louder and faster, his adlibs becoming more erratic. Mumble, mumble, whoop, whoop, skrt, I, mumble, mumble, huh. I tried to ignore him and just get him out of the store as quickly as possible, but then he turned to me and said, "You think I'm just some dumb rapper, huh?" I didn't know how to respond, so I just shrugged and said, "I don't know." He leaned in closer, his breath hot on my face. "I'm not just some dumb rapper. I'm a genius. And if anyone ever tries to bring me down, I'll show them what a real genius can do." I started to feel uneasy, and I just wanted him to leave. He paid for his snacks and left the store, but as he got into his SUV, I could still hear him muttering under his breath. Mumble, mumble, kill, I, mumble, mumble, huh. I watched as his SUV drove off into the night, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know what he meant by those words, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I was at a music festival, enjoying the sounds of some of my favorite artists. The sun was setting, and the crowd was starting to thin out. That's when I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. It was a low, guttural mumble, punctuated by repetitive adlibs. I looked around and saw a figure in the distance, swaying and muttering to himself. As he got closer, I recognized him as a Mumble rapper I had heard of before. He stumbled towards me, muttering adlibs under his breath. Yeah, he repeated over and over. His eyes were glazed over, and he seemed to be in another world entirely. I tried to move away from him, but he followed me, still muttering to himself. His adlibs grew louder and more aggressive. SKRT, yeah, he said, his voice rising in volume. I was starting to feel really uncomfortable, so I tried to make my way through the crowd. But he kept following me, still muttering and mumbling. You, he said, getting louder and more aggressive with each step. Finally, I saw an opening in the crowd and made a run for it. I could hear his adlibs getting further and further away as I sprinted towards safety. Looking back, I couldn't help but shudder at the memory of the Mumble rapper's repetitive adlibs. It was a moment that left me feeling uneasy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly escaped a potentially dangerous situation. I was walking home from work one night, taking my usual route through the park. It was quiet, and I could hear the sound of my own footsteps echoing through the trees. That's when I heard it, a low, muffled muttering. I turned around, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off and continued walking, but the muttering got louder. It sounded like someone was talking to themselves, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I turned around again and saw a figure in the distance, walking towards me. As they got closer, I could see it was a young man with dreadlocks and face tattoos. He was muttering to himself, and every now and then he would yell out an adlib like SKRRT or I. I quickened my pace, feeling uneasy. But the man was following me, muttering under his breath. He seemed harmless enough, but something about him made my skin crawl. Suddenly, he broke out into a full-on rap, shouting out lyrics and adlibs as he walked towards me. It was like he was performing for an invisible audience. I tried to ignore him and keep walking, but he kept following me. Finally, I reached the exit of the park and saw a police car parked nearby. I ran over to them, breathless, and told them about the man following me. They went to investigate, but when they came back, they said they couldn't find anyone. I was relieved, but still on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That's when I heard it again, the muttering, coming from behind me. I turned around and saw the man with the dreadlocks, standing just a few feet away. "Hey man, sorry to scare you," he said, still muttering under his breath. "I was just working on some new adlibs for my next album. You know how it is." I nodded, still feeling a bit uneasy. But the man didn't seem threatening, just lost in his own world of music. He walked away, muttering to himself once again, and I continued on my way home. It was a strange and unsettling encounter, but at least I lived to tell the tale. I was at a music festival with my friends, enjoying the sights and sounds of our favorite artists. We had just finished watching one of the headliners when we heard a low rumble coming from the stage across the field. Curious, we wandered over to see who was performing. As we approached the stage, we saw a lone figure standing in the spotlight. He wore a ski mask and a heavy chain around his neck, and his music was unlike anything we had ever heard. The beat was slow and heavy, and the rapper's voice was deep and mumbled. He muttered adlibs under his breath, repeating them over and over again. "SKRT, SKRT, he shouted. "Hey, hey, hey," he repeated. "Choppa choppa," he growled. We were intrigued, and we started to dance along with the beat. But as the set continued, we noticed something strange. The rapper's muttering became more and more frenzied, and his eyes started to roll back in his head. "SKRT, SKRT. Hey, hey, hey. Choppa choppa," he screamed. Suddenly, he lunged off the stage and charged into the crowd. People scattered, trying to get out of his way, but he was moving too fast. He grabbed a girl by the hair and pulled her to the ground, snarling like an animal. My friends and I ran to help her, but the rapper was too strong. He knocked us aside and continued his rampage, muttering his adlibs under his breath. "SKRT, SKRT. Hey, hey, hey. Choppa choppa," he chanted. We finally managed to subdue him and call for help, but the incident left us shaken. We later learned that the rapper had a history of drug use and mental illness, and that he had gone off his medication before the festival. It was a scary reminder that even something as innocuous as a music festival could turn deadly in an instant. I was a sound engineer working with a popular Mumble rapper. He had a big following on social media, and we were in the middle of a tour across the country. I wasn't particularly a fan of his music, but it was a good paying gig, and I enjoyed working with a talented artist. One night, after a particularly long show, the rapper asked me to join him and a few of his friends for an after party at his hotel room. I hesitated, but the rapper was insistent, and I eventually agreed to go. We arrived at the hotel room, and the rapper and his friends started to party. They were drinking and smoking, and I sat on the sidelines, watching them have fun. As the night wore on, the rapper started to act strangely. He was mumbling and talking to himself, and his eyes were glazed over. I tried to ignore it, but the atmosphere in the room was starting to make me uncomfortable. I decided to leave and told the rapper that I was going to head back to my hotel room. As I walked down the hallway, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw the rapper, stumbling towards me. His eyes were now bloodshot, and he was muttering incomprehensible words under his breath. I tried to back away, but he kept coming towards me, getting closer and closer. I finally reached my hotel room and locked the door behind me. But the rapper was still outside, pounding on the door and yelling incoherently. I was terrified, and I called security for help. The rapper was eventually taken away by the authorities, and I never worked with him again. It turns out that he had a history of drug abuse, and that night, he had taken something that made him completely lose control. It was a scary experience, and I'm glad I made it out alive. It was a stark reminder of how easy it is to get caught up in the wrong crowd, and how quickly things can spiral out of control. I'm a college student, and I work part-time at a local gas station to help pay for tuition. One night, a guy in his mid-20s walked into the store wearing a hoodie and sunglasses. He had a bunch of tattoos and gold chains around his neck. He asked for a pack of cigarettes and started mumbling under his breath. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but it sounded like he was rapping to himself. I thought it was a little weird, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. A few days later, I was walking home from class when I saw the same guy standing on the corner, still wearing his hoodie and sunglasses. He was rapping to himself again, but this time I could make out some of the lyrics. They were dark and twisted, filled with violence and drug references. I felt a chill run down my spine and quickened my pace. But when I turned around, the guy was following me. I started to run, but he was faster. He caught up to me and grabbed my arm, pulling me into an alleyway. I thought I was going to die, but instead, he just started rapping at me. The lyrics were about how he had been wronged by society, and how he was going to take revenge on the world. It was like he was speaking directly to me, and I felt like I was in the middle of his twisted world. Eventually, he let me go and disappeared into the night. I reported it to the police, but they couldn't find him. I still see him around town from time to time, rapping to himself on street corners. It's like he's always watching me, waiting for his chance to strike again. I don't know if he's just a disturbed individual or if he's actually dangerous, but either way, I'll never forget the fear I felt that night. I was on my way home from a late night shift at the gas station, tired and ready to crawl into bed. As I walked down the deserted street, I heard a faint sound in the distance. It sounded like someone was muttering adlibs, and I couldn't quite make out what they were saying. As I got closer, the muttering became louder. It was a Mumble rapper, stumbling down the street with a bottle of liquor in his hand. He was muttering adlibs over and over again, like D. Rose and Sosa. He was swaying back and forth, his eyes glazed over. I tried to walk past him, but he stumbled into my path. I could smell the alcohol on his breath as he muttered his adlibs in my face. I tried to step around him, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me closer. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as he muttered his adlibs over and over again. I tried to pull away, but he was surprisingly strong. I could feel his hot breath on my face as he muttered incoherently. Just as I thought things were going to take a turn for the worst, a police car pulled up. The officers quickly assessed the situation and were able to separate me from the Mumble rapper. As they led him away, still muttering his adlibs, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Looking back on that night, I realized how easily things could have turned out differently. I learned that even the most mundane activities, like walking home from work, can turn into a nightmare. From that day forward, I made sure to be more aware of my surroundings and to always stay vigilant. I was at a concert for a popular Mumble rapper, hyped up and ready for a night of energetic music and wild crowds. The lights dimmed, and the rapper emerged on stage, wearing a black hoodie and a diamond-studded chain. The bass dropped, and the crowd went wild. As the concert went on, the rapper began to mutter adlibs, just like he did in his songs. D. Rose, Lil Boat, and Gucci Gang echoed through the arena. I was having a great time, lost in the music and the energy of the crowd. But then, something strange started to happen. The rapper's muttering became more frequent and intense. He would pause in between verses to mutter to himself, and his eyes would dart around the stage, as if he were seeing something that wasn't there. I tried to ignore it, but it became harder and harder to do so. The rapper's eyes grew wider, and his muttering turned into full-blown conversations with himself. He seemed to be arguing with someone, or something, that I couldn't see. The crowd began to murmur nervously, and some people started to leave. But I couldn't tear myself away. I was too fascinated, too caught up in the strange spectacle unfolding before me. Suddenly, the rapper stopped mid-song and turned to face the back of the stage. His eyes were fixed on something, and he began to mutter even more frantically. I strained my ears to listen, trying to make out what he was saying. And then I heard it. A low, guttural growling sound, coming from behind the stage. It was so low that I could barely hear it, but it was there, and it was getting louder. The rapper's muttering turned into screams, and he bolted off stage, his diamond chain jangling behind him. The crowd erupted in chaos, and I found myself caught up in a sea of people, pushing and shoving to get out of the arena. I made it out safely, but I never forgot the strange and terrifying experience I had that night. To this day, I still wonder what it was that the rapper saw, and what caused him to mutter and scream like that. I was out with my friends at a local club, enjoying the music and the lively atmosphere. We were all having a great time dancing and drinking, when suddenly the music changed. The beat was slower, and the lyrics were mumbled, but the crowd seemed to love it. Everyone was swaying to the music, but something about it made me feel uneasy. I looked up at the stage, and there was a rapper I had never seen before. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, and his face was obscured by a red bandana. He mumbled into the microphone, and the crowd cheered. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the night went on, the rapper's music became more and more popular. People were chanting his name and singing along to his mumbled lyrics. But every time I looked up at the stage, the rapper was staring right at me. It was like he knew something I didn't. I tried to shake off the feeling and enjoy the rest of my night, but as I was leaving the club, I saw the rapper waiting outside for me. He walked up to me and whispered in my ear, I know who you are. I froze, feeling a chill run down my spine. How could he possibly know me? I had never seen him before in my life. He continued, "You better watch your back. I know what you did." I was stunned. What could he be talking about? I tried to ask him, but he just walked away, disappearing into the night. From that night on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I went out, I felt like someone was following me. I even changed my routine, but it didn't help. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the rapper, and it read, "I know what you did. I know where you live. I'm coming for you." I was terrified, but I knew I had to do something. I went to the police and showed them the letter, and they were able to track down the rapper's real identity. It turned out he was a former acquaintance who had a grudge against me for something I had said years ago. Luckily, the police were able to apprehend him before he could do any harm to me. But to this day, I still can't listen to mumble rap without feeling a sense of unease. I was at a concert in a small club in the city, excited to see a Lil Pump tribute act perform. The place was packed, with fans of all ages eagerly waiting for the show to start. As the lights went down, the crowd erupted into cheers. The tribute act came out on stage, wearing a colorful outfit and sporting the same hairstyle as Lil Pump. He started performing some of his biggest hits, and the crowd went wild. But something about the performance felt off. As he rapped, I could hear him muttering adlibs under his breath. It was like he was talking to himself, and it made me feel uneasy. I tried to shake off the feeling and enjoy the show, but the muttering continued. Suddenly, the tribute act stopped rapping and started muttering louder and faster. He looked like he was in a trance, and the crowd fell silent. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I knew something was wrong. The tribute act pulled out a small knife and began to wave it around, muttering unintelligibly. People started to panic and push their way towards the exits. I tried to make my way out, but the crowd was too thick. I looked back at the stage, and the tribute act was still muttering and waving the knife around. I realized then that this wasn't part of the show. He was completely out of control. As the crowd thinned out, I finally made my way to the exit and ran out onto the street. I could hear sirens in the distance, and I knew the police had been called. I later found out that the tribute act had been arrested and charged with assault with a deadly weapon. It was a terrifying experience, and one that I would never forget. I realized then that not all concerts are safe, and that even something as simple as muttering adlibs could be a sign of something much more sinister. I was working as a security guard at a music festival, and my job was to keep an eye on the backstage area. It was a fun gig, and I got to see some of my favorite artists up close. But one night, something strange happened that I'll never forget. There was a mumble rapper scheduled to perform that night, and I was told to keep an eye on him because he had a history of causing trouble. I didn't think much of it at first, but as the night went on, things started to get weird. The rapper, who was wearing a ski mask, started pacing back and forth in his dressing room, muttering to himself. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but it didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard before. His eyes were darting around the room, and he seemed agitated and paranoid. As the time for his performance approached, the rapper became more and more erratic. He started pacing faster and faster, and his muttering turned into a low growl. I was getting more and more uneasy, and I could tell that the other people in the room were too. Suddenly, the rapper turned to me and locked eyes with me through his ski mask. He started to move toward me, slowly at first, but then faster and faster. I was frozen in place, unable to move or speak. As he got closer, I could hear what he was saying. It was like he was chanting something, but I couldn't make out the words. He was getting louder and louder, and his eyes were wild with fury. Just when I thought he was going to attack me, one of the festival organizers burst into the room and grabbed the rapper. He was shouting at him, telling him to calm down and get ready to perform. The rapper snapped out of his trance-like state and started to get ready for his set. As he left the room, I could hear him muttering to himself again, but this time it was in a different language. It sounded like some sort of ancient incantation, and it sent chills down my spine. I never found out what the rapper was saying, but I know that I never want to be in a room with him again. It was like he was possessed by some dark force, and I'm just glad that I lived to tell the tale. I was walking home from my friend's party late at night, my ears still ringing from the loud music. As I made my way down the dimly lit street, I noticed a figure in the distance. It was a man walking towards me, rapping to himself under his breath. As he got closer, I could make out his face. It was a well-known Mumble rapper, one of the biggest in the game. I couldn't believe it. What was he doing in this part of town, all by himself? As we passed each other, I couldn't help but feel a chill down my spine. The rapper's eyes were glazed over, and he was muttering incoherently to himself. But I brushed it off as exhaustion from a long night of partying. Just as I was about to turn the corner, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and to my horror, saw the rapper following me. His eyes were now fixed on me, and he was rapping louder and more aggressively than before. I quickened my pace, but he kept getting closer. I could hear him mumbling something about taking me down and making me pay. I knew I had to do something fast. I turned around and faced him, holding out my hands in a gesture of peace. "Hey man, what's going on?" I asked, trying to sound calm and collected. The rapper stopped in his tracks, and for a moment, I thought he was going to attack me. But then, he suddenly broke down in tears, sobbing uncontrollably. "I don't know what's happening to me," he gasped between sobs. "I've been under so much pressure to perform, to be someone I'm not. I feel like I'm losing my mind." We sat down on the sidewalk together, and I listened as he poured out his heart to me. It turned out that the pressures of fame had gotten to him, and he was struggling to keep up with the expectations of his record label and fans. As we parted ways, I couldn't help but feel grateful that I had been there for him in his moment of need. And while the experience was certainly terrifying, it reminded me of the power of human connection and empathy, even in the face of fear. I had always been a fan of mumble rap, so when I heard that one of my favorite artists was performing at a small club in the city, I knew I had to be there. I arrived early and found a spot near the front of the stage, eager to see the performer up close. As the opening acts finished, the energy in the room began to build. And then, he took the stage, the mumble rapper I had been waiting to see. The crowd erupted into cheers as he started his set, the bass reverberating through my body. But as the concert went on, something began to feel off. The rapper seemed agitated, his lyrics becoming increasingly violent and aggressive. And then, during one particularly intense song, he jumped off the stage and charged into the crowd. I was pushed to the ground as people panicked and tried to escape. I felt a hand grab me by the hair and pull me up, and I found myself face to face with the mumble rapper. His eyes were wild and bloodshot, and he was foaming at the mouth. He began to rap directly into my ear, his voice low and menacing. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but it sounded like he was threatening me. I tried to push him away, but he was too strong. Suddenly, there was a commotion behind us, and the rapper turned his attention to the security guards who were trying to pull him away. I took my chance and ran out of the club, heart pounding in my chest. Later that night, I heard on the news that the Mumble rapper had been arrested for assault and drug possession. I shuddered to think what might have happened if I had been alone with him for any longer. I still love mumble rap, but now I always make sure to stay safe and aware at concerts. You never know what kind of dangerous situation you might find yourself in. I was out for a walk in the city, taking in the sights and sounds of the busy streets. As I turned a corner, I saw a man walking towards me with his hood pulled up, hiding his face from view. I didn't think much of it until I heard the muffled sound of music coming from his headphones. It was a familiar beat, one that I had heard on the radio countless times. As he got closer, I realized who it was. It was a mumble rapper, one who had risen to fame in recent years. I couldn't believe it. What was he doing here, in the middle of the city, by himself? I was about to say something to him when I noticed something strange. He wasn't walking like a normal person. His movements were jerky, almost robotic, as if he were being controlled by something else. As he passed by me, I could hear him mumbling to himself. It was almost like he was talking in tongues, a language I couldn't understand. I felt a shiver run down my spine and decided to keep my distance. But then, he turned around and started walking towards me again. This time, his movements were even more erratic. He was twitching and convulsing, and I could see his eyes rolling back into his head. I tried to run, but he was too fast. He caught up to me and grabbed me by the arm, his grip like a vice. I could feel his hot breath on my neck as he whispered in my ear. "I've been possessed," he said, his voice low and menacing. "And I'm taking you with me." I struggled to break free, but it was no use. He was too strong. Suddenly, he let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed onto the ground, his body convulsing. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there, frozen in fear. After a few moments, he stopped moving and lay still on the pavement. I called the police and waited for them to arrive. When they got there, they told me that the mumble rapper had been struggling with drug addiction and had likely overdosed. I never forgot that encounter, and every time I hear one of his songs on the radio, I can't help but think about what could have happened if I hadn't been able to get away. I was walking down the street late at night when I heard the sound of music blaring from a nearby alleyway. Being a fan of hip-hop, I decided to investigate. As I got closer, I could hear the unmistakable sound of a mumble rapper. It was hard to make out the lyrics, but I could tell it was a violent and aggressive song. Suddenly, the music stopped, and a tall, imposing figure stepped out of the shadows. It was the rapper himself, wearing a black hoodie and a gold chain around his neck. He looked at me with cold, calculating eyes and asked if I wanted to hear some unreleased tracks. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I followed him into the alley. As he played his music, I started to feel uneasy. The lyrics were filled with violent imagery and explicit content. But it was his demeanor that really scared me. He seemed to be getting more and more agitated with each passing minute, pacing back and forth and muttering to himself. I tried to leave, but he blocked my path, demanding that I listen to his entire album. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I realized I was in a dangerous situation. Just as I thought it was all over for me, a group of police officers appeared out of nowhere and arrested the mumble rapper on the spot. Apparently, he was wanted for a string of violent crimes and had been hiding out in that alleyway. I was lucky to have gotten out of there alive, but the experience left me shaken. From that day on, I promised myself to be more careful about who I trusted and where I went at night. I was at a small concert venue in the city, enjoying a night out with some friends. The opening act was a mumble rapper who had just started to make a name for himself on SoundCloud. I wasn't really into his music, but I was there to support my friend who was a big fan. The rapper came out on stage and started his set. His lyrics were filled with violent imagery and profanity, but the crowd was really into it. I stood at the back of the venue, nursing my drink and watching the show. As the night wore on, I noticed something strange about the rapper's behavior. He kept staring at me during his songs, and mouthing the words directly at me. It was unsettling, but I tried to shake it off and enjoy the music. After the show, I was walking out of the venue with my friends when the rapper approached us. He was sweaty and out of breath, but he had a manic energy about him. He started to talk to me, but his words were slurred and almost unintelligible. He kept repeating my name, over and over again. I didn't know how he knew my name, but I was starting to get scared. My friends tried to intervene, but the rapper pushed them away and grabbed me by the arm. He pulled me close to him and whispered in my ear, "I know what you did. You can't hide from me." I was terrified, and I tried to pull away from him. But he held me tight and kept repeating those same words. Thankfully, some security guards heard the commotion and rushed over to help. They escorted the rapper out of the venue and made sure we got to our cars safely. I never did find out what the rapper meant by his cryptic message. But I knew one thing for sure, I was never going to another concert again without being hyper-aware of my surroundings. I was out late one night, walking home from a friend's house in the city. The streets were quiet, and I was lost in my own thoughts when I heard a strange noise coming from behind me. It was a low, rhythmic murmur, almost like someone was speaking in tongues. I turned around, but there was no one there. The sound got louder, and I realized it was coming from a dark alleyway up ahead. I hesitated, but curiosity got the best of me, and I started walking towards the source of the noise. As I got closer, I could see a figure standing in the shadows. It was a man, dressed in all black, with a hood pulled up over his head. He was swaying back and forth, muttering under his breath. I started to feel uneasy, but something about the man's movements intrigued me. I realized he was rapping, the words flowing out of his mouth in a steady stream of consciousness. It was like nothing I had ever heard before. The man's lyrics were dark and disturbing, filled with violent imagery and references to drugs and death. He was a mumble rapper, but there was a raw power in his words that I couldn't ignore. I stood there, listening to the man's performance, transfixed. But as he got closer, I realized that something was off. The man's eyes were glazed over, and his movements were jerky and erratic. Suddenly, he lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. I tried to fight back, but he was too strong. We struggled, grappling in the dark alleyway, until finally, I managed to break free. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I was safely inside my own apartment, the door locked behind me. As I sat there, catching my breath, I couldn't help but think about the mumble rapper. Who was he? What had he been rapping about? And most importantly, was he still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next victim? I was at a party with my friends when I saw him. He was a mumble rapper that I recognized from the local music scene. I was a fan of his music, but I had heard stories about him being involved in some shady stuff. As the night went on, I found myself talking to him. He was charismatic and charming, and he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We had a few drinks, and I began to feel more and more comfortable around him. But then, things took a dark turn. He started talking about his business ventures and how he had connections in the drug trade. He boasted about how he had gotten away with things that would land anyone else in prison. I started to feel uneasy, and I tried to make an excuse to leave. But he wouldn't let me go. He grabbed my arm and pulled me close, whispering in my ear that he had a proposition for me. I could feel his hot breath on my neck, and I knew that I was in danger. I tried to pull away, but he was too strong. I thought I was going to die. But then, suddenly, he let go of me and laughed. It was a cruel, mocking laugh that made my blood run cold. He told me that it was all a joke, that he was just messing with me. I ran out of the party as fast as I could, shaking with fear. As I walked home alone in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. The next day, I heard the news that the Mumble rapper had been arrested for drug trafficking. I couldn't believe it. I had been so close to danger, and I had no idea. From that day on, I never trusted anyone at face value again. You never know who might be hiding something sinister beneath the surface. I was walking home from a late-night shift at the convenience store, trying to mind my own business and get home safely. That's when I heard the sound of someone rapping behind me. I turned around and saw a young man, dressed in flashy clothes and a beanie, rapping to himself. I didn't think much of it and kept walking. But the guy started to get louder, and I could hear his lyrics more clearly. "Listen to my mixtape, it's fire," he repeated over and over again. I rolled my eyes and tried to keep walking, but the guy kept following me. "Yo, man, you gotta check out my SoundCloud," he said, his voice getting more desperate. "I'm the next big thing in mumble rap, I swear." I was getting annoyed and a little bit scared. The guy was following me, and his lyrics were getting more aggressive. He kept talking about guns and violence, and I didn't want to be anywhere near him. I quickened my pace, but the guy started to run after me. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, and I knew I had to do something. I turned around and faced him, ready to defend myself. But as soon as he saw me looking at him, he stopped rapping and ran away. I was left standing there, feeling relieved but also a little bit confused. Was this guy just trying to promote his music, or was he up to something more sinister? I never saw the mumble rapper again, but I still think about that night sometimes. It's scary to think about how someone can be so obsessed with their music that they're willing to scare people on the street just to get their attention. It's a reminder to always be aware of our surroundings and to trust our instincts when something doesn't feel right. I was walking home from work, scrolling through my phone, when I heard someone behind me. I turned around to see a guy, probably in his mid-20s, walking towards me. He was wearing a hoodie, sunglasses, and had his earbuds in. I couldn't see his face, but I could hear the music blasting from his earbuds. As he got closer, I could make out the repetitive beat and the sound of his voice, rapping over the beat. It was a mumble rapper, and the lyrics were so repetitive that I could hear them from a distance. "Listen to my mixtape, check out my SoundCloud, I'm the hottest thing in the game," he mumbled. I tried to walk faster, but he matched my pace, still rapping at the top of his lungs. He was so close that I could see the sweat on his forehead. "Hey, yo, you gotta listen to my music," he said, pulling out his phone and shoving it in my face. "I'm telling you, I'm the next big thing." I politely declined and tried to walk away, but he kept following me, still rapping and promoting his music. I tried to ignore him, but he was persistent. Eventually, I got fed up and turned around to confront him. That's when I saw the look in his eyes. It was like he was possessed. He grabbed my arm and pulled me towards him. "You gotta listen to my music, man," he said, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. I pulled away and ran as fast as I could, looking back to make sure he wasn't following me. I made it home safely, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something much more sinister than a pushy rapper. From that day on, I made sure to keep my earbuds in and my eyes on my surroundings. I never wanted to be caught off guard again by someone so determined to make me listen to their mixtape.